Sarah Martinez never imagined she would find herself in the middle of a war zone, let alone become the center of a debate that would echo through military corridors for years to come. Growing up in a small Texas town, she was the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher, raised with values of hard work and determination that would later save lives in ways no one could predict. The controversy began long before Sarah ever set foot on foreign soil. When the military first announced its decision to allow women in combat support roles, the reaction was swift and divided. Seasoned soldiers, politicians, and military analysts filled news programs with heated debates about whether women could handle the physical and mental demands of battlefield situations. "Women don't belong in combat zones," declared retired General Robert Hayes during a televised interview. "It's not about equality, it's about reality. When bullets start flying and soldiers are bleeding out, you need people who can carry a 200-pound man to safety. That's just biology." These words, and countless others like them, created an atmosphere of skepticism that followed every woman who enlisted in combat support roles. Sarah heard these doubts constantly during her training, whispered in mess halls, and spoken openly during briefings. Some of her male counterparts questioned whether she would freeze under pressure or become a liability when things got dangerous. Sarah's journey to that fateful day began 2 years earlier when she enlisted as a medic. Her decision surprised everyone who knew her, including herself. She had been working as an emergency room nurse in Dallas, comfortable in her civilian life, when she witnessed a news report about wounded soldiers returning from overseas. Something about their stories stirred something deep inside her, a calling she couldn't ignore. The military medical training was more intense than anything she had experienced in nursing school. Physical fitness requirements pushed her body to its limits, while medical simulations tested her ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme stress. Her instructors were demanding, sometimes deliberately harsh, as if testing whether she would break under the pressure that male recruits faced. During one particularly grueling exercise, Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, her lead instructor, created a scenario designed to test her limits. "Martinez, you've got multiple casualties, limited supplies, and incoming fire. What's your priority?" The simulation involved mannequins with various simulated injuries, realistic sound effects of gunfire and explosions, and time pressure that made her hands shake. Sarah quickly assessed the situation, applying medical protocols she had memorized. She stabilized the most critical patient first, directed other trainees to assist with less serious injuries, and maintained her composure even when Torres shouted contradictory orders designed to confuse her. When the exercise ended, Torres nodded approvingly, but his praise came with a warning. "You did good today, Martinez, but training is different from real combat. When actual bullets are flying and real blood is flowing, we'll see what you're really made of." These words would prove prophetic, though not in the way Torres intended. The doubt that surrounded women in combat roles wasn't limited to training environments. It followed Sarah and her female colleagues into every assignment, every briefing, and every mission. Military culture, built on centuries of male-dominated traditions, struggled to adapt to the reality of women serving in dangerous situations. The deployment orders came 6 months after Sarah completed her advanced medical training. She was assigned to a forward operating base in a region where insurgent activity had recently increased. The base served as a staging area for special operations teams, including Navy SEALs who conducted high-risk missions in the surrounding area. The culture shock was immediate and intense. The forward operating base was a masculine environment where strength and toughness were valued above all else. Sarah found herself constantly proving her worth, not just as a medic, but as someone who belonged in this dangerous place. The Navy SEALs, in particular, seemed skeptical of having a female medic attached to their operations. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Morrison was the team leader of SEAL Team 7, a veteran of multiple deployments who had earned his nickname through his precision and deadly effectiveness in combat. When he first met Sarah during a briefing about an upcoming operation, his skepticism was barely concealed. "So you're our new medic," Morrison said, looking her up and down with obvious doubt. "Have you ever been shot at before, Martinez?" "Not yet, sir, but I'm trained and ready," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze directly despite feeling intimidated by his reputation and presence. Morrison's expression didn't change. Training is one thing. Getting shot at is something else entirely. When things go bad out there, and they will go bad, I need to know that my medic won't freeze up or become another casualty I have to worry about. The conversation reflected a broader concern among special operations teams about integrating women into combat roles. These units operated in the most dangerous environments, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death. The addition of women to these teams represented not just a policy change, but a fundamental shift in military culture. Sarah understood the skepticism, even if it frustrated her. She knew she would have to prove herself through actions, not words. The opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected, in circumstances that would test everything she had learned about medicine, courage, and survival. The mission that would change everything was designated Operation Desert Falcon, a night raid designed to capture a high-value target suspected of coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence suggested the target was hiding in a compound approximately 15 miles from a base, in an area known for heavy insurgent activity. The briefing took place in a cramped room filled with maps, satellite photos, and tactical equipment. Morrison outlined the mission parameters while Sarah listened carefully, knowing that her medical expertise might be crucial if things went wrong. The plan called for a quick insertion via helicopter, a rapid assault on the compound, and extraction with the target in custody. "Martinez, you'll be positioned at the landing zone with communications equipment and medical supplies," Morrison explained. "If anyone gets hurt during the assault, you'll be responsible for keeping them alive until we can get back to base." The assignment was both a vote of confidence and a limitation. Sarah would be close enough to the action to provide immediate medical care, but positioned away from the most dangerous part of the operation. It was a compromise that acknowledged her medical skills while protecting the team from having an unproven female soldier in the thick of combat. As the team prepared for deployment, Sarah checked and rechecked her medical supplies, mentally rehearsing procedures she might need to perform under fire. Her equipment included advanced trauma care supplies, pain medication, and emergency surgical tools that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. The helicopter ride to the landing zone was tense and quiet, with each team member focused on their role in the upcoming operation. Sarah sat among warriors who had years of combat experience, men who had faced death numerous times and survived through skill, courage, and trust in their teammates. She wondered if she would measure up when the test came. The landing zone was a flat area approximately 200 meters from the target compound, chosen for its strategic position and relative security. As the helicopter touched down, Morrison's team quickly disembarked and began moving toward their objective, leaving Sarah with a radio operator and a small security detail. The night was clear and quiet, with only the distant sound of the helicopter departing to break the silence. Sarah established her medical station, laying out supplies and equipment she might need in an emergency. The radio crackled with periodic updates from Morrison's team as they approached the compound. "Overwatch, this is Reaper 1. We're in position and beginning our approach to the target building." "Copy, Reaper 1. All stations report ready." Sarah listened to the radio traffic with growing tension, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the success or failure of the mission. More importantly for her, it would be her first real test as a combat medic, the moment when training would meet reality in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. The doubt that had followed her through training and deployment was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. In less than an hour, Sarah would find herself facing a situation that would challenge every assumption about women in combat, and her response would become a story told throughout the military for years to come. As she waited in the darkness, checking her equipment one final time, Sarah had no way of knowing that she was about to become the center of a story that would change how the military viewed women in combat forever. The doubt that surrounded her deployment would soon be replaced by something entirely different. Respect earned through courage under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, calm and professional despite the gravity of the situation unfolding at the compound. Overwatch, Reaper 1. We have eyes on the target building. Multiple heat signatures inside. Beginning approach. Sarah monitored the communications while scanning the surrounding area through her night vision goggles. The landscape looked peaceful in the green-tinted display, but she knew appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. Her medical supplies were arranged within easy reach, and she had mentally rehearsed every procedure she might need to perform. The first sign that something was wrong came not through the radio, but through the sound that every soldier learns to fear, the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoing across the desert. The shots came in rapid succession, followed immediately by Morrison's urgent voice over the radio. Contact, contact! We're taking fire from multiple positions. This was a trap. The night erupted into chaos as the sound of automatic weapons fire filled the air. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but her training kicked in as she prepared for casualties. The radio traffic became a confused mixture of tactical commands, situation reports, and calls for support. Reaper 2 is hit. I repeat, Reaper 2 is down. We've got multiple shooters in the building and surrounding positions. This is Reaper 1. We need immediate extraction. The whole area is crawling with hostiles. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and started moving toward the sound of gunfire, despite orders to remain at the landing zone. Her radio operator, Corporal James Park, tried to stop her. Martinez, you're supposed to stay here. Morrison's orders. Morrison's got wounded men, Sarah replied, checking her pistol to ensure it was ready to fire. I'm not sitting here while people are bleeding to death. The decision to move forward went against everything she had been taught about following orders and maintaining position, but Sarah's medical training overrode her military discipline. She had taken an oath to preserve life, and that oath didn't come with exceptions for dangerous situations. Moving across the desert terrain in darkness was treacherous, even with night vision equipment. Sarah used available cover to advance toward the compound, following the sound of gunfire and radio communications to guide her movement. The closer she got to the fighting, the more intense the situation became. The compound was a maze of buildings and walls, perfect for the kind of close-quarters combat that favored defenders who knew the terrain. Morrison's team had been caught in a carefully planned ambush, with insurgents positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. Sarah reached a position approximately 50 meters from the main building, just as the situation deteriorated further. Through her night vision goggles, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as insurgents poured fire into the areas where the SEAL team was trying to take cover. Overwatch, this is Reaper 1. We've got multiple casualties, and we're pinned down. We need air support and medical assistance now. Morrison's voice carried a note of desperation that Sarah had never heard before. The invincible SEAL leader was facing a situation that threatened to overwhelm his team, and Sarah realized that she might be the only medical help available for the foreseeable future. Making a decision that would haunt and inspire her for years to come, Sarah keyed her radio. Reaper 1, this is Martinez. I'm approximately 50 meters south of your position with full medical supplies. Guide me to your casualties. There was a moment of stunned silence before Morrison's voice came back, filled with disbelief and anger. Martinez, get back to the landing zone immediately. That's a direct order. With respect, sir, people are bleeding and I'm the medic. Tell me where you need me. What Sarah couldn't see from her position was the full scope of the ambush. Intelligence had been wrong about the compound containing only the target and a few guards. Instead, Morrison's team had walked into a carefully prepared trap involving at least 20 insurgents armed with automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Tank Williams, Morrison's second-in-command, had been hit in the leg and chest during the initial contact. He was bleeding heavily and going into shock, hidden behind a low wall that provided minimal protection from the crossfire. Morrison was trying to reach him while returning fire, but every attempt to move resulted in a fresh barrage of bullets. Martinez, Tank is hit bad behind the north wall of the main building, but you can't get to him without crossing open ground that's covered by at least 3 shooters. Sarah studied the terrain between her position and the wounded SEAL. The open area Morrison described was a kill zone where anyone attempting to cross would be completely exposed. Logic and training said she should wait for air support or additional troops, but Tank was bleeding to death while she watched. The moment that would define Sarah's career came when she made the conscious decision to sprint across that open ground. She broke cover at a full run, carrying her medical bag and trusting in speed and luck to get her across the deadly space between buildings. The insurgents spotted her immediately. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions as bullets began snapping through the air around her. Sarah ran harder than she had ever run in her life, zigzagging to make herself a more difficult target while maintaining her grip on the medical supplies that Tank needed to survive. She was halfway across the open ground when the first bullet hit her. The impact felt like being hit with a baseball bat, spinning her partially around and causing her to stumble. The bullet had struck her left shoulder, tearing through muscle and sending waves of pain down her arm. But Sarah kept running, knowing that stopping in the open would mean death for both her and Tank. 2 more bullets found their mark before she reached cover. One grazed her right leg, sending her tumbling behind the wall where Tank lay dying. The third bullet hit her in the back, just below her body armor, creating a wound that would require surgery, but missed vital organs by inches. Morrison appeared beside her, his face a mixture of admiration and fury. "Martinez, you crazy fool. Are you hit?" "I'm fine," Sarah lied, already working on Tank's wounds despite the blood running down her own back. "Help me get pressure on this chest wound." Tank was unconscious and had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Sarah quickly assessed his injuries. A bullet had entered his left lung, causing it to collapse, while another had shattered his femur and severed an artery in his leg. Without immediate treatment, he would be dead within minutes. Working under fire, with her own injuries sending waves of pain through her body, Sarah began the most challenging medical procedure of her life. She inserted a chest tube to reinflate Tank's collapsed lung, using equipment from her medical bag, while Morrison provided cover fire against insurgents who kept trying to get better shooting angles. "How bad is he?" Morrison asked during a brief lull in the gunfire. "Bad, but I can keep him alive if we can get him out of here," Sarah replied, working to control the bleeding in Tank's leg. "How long until extraction?" "Air support is 15 minutes out. Extraction helicopter 20 minutes behind that." "Can you keep him going that long?" Sarah looked at Tank's pale face and rapidly weakening pulse, then at her own blood loss from 3 bullet wounds. The honest answer was that she didn't know if either of them would survive the next 35 minutes, but giving up wasn't an option. "We're going to make it," she said, more to convince herself than Morrison. The next few minutes tested everything Sarah had learned about battlefield medicine. Working with one arm partially disabled and blood loss making her increasingly lightheaded, she managed to stabilize Tank's breathing and slow the bleeding in his leg. Morrison continued to return fire while calling in their position to the incoming air support. The sound of approaching aircraft brought the first hope Sarah had felt since the firefight began. Apache attack helicopters appeared on the horizon, their distinctive silhouette visible even in the darkness. The insurgents knew what was coming and began to withdraw from their positions, but they weren't finished with Morrison's team. As the Apaches began their attack runs, destroying insurgent positions with precision strikes, a new threat emerged. A group of 3 insurgents had worked their way around to a position where they could throw grenades over the wall where Sarah and Morrison were treating Tank. The first grenade landed 10 feet away from their position. Morrison threw himself over Tank, and Sarah, as the explosion sent shrapnel flying through the air. When the smoke cleared, Morrison was bleeding from multiple wounds, and Sarah realized that their situation had just become desperate. "Can you move?" Morrison asked, struggling to sit up despite his new injuries. Before Sarah could answer, 2 more grenades landed nearby. The explosions were deafening, filling the air with dust and debris. When Sarah's hearing began to return, she realized that Morrison was unconscious and bleeding heavily from a head wound. Now she was alone with 2 critically wounded SEALs, unable to call for help because the radio had been destroyed in the grenade attack. The Apache helicopters were still attacking insurgent positions, but they couldn't see the immediate threat to Sarah's position. The 4th bullet hit Sarah as she was trying to move Morrison to better cover. This one caught her in the side, just below her ribs, and the impact was enough to knock her down completely. She lay on the ground for several seconds, struggling to breathe and fighting waves of nausea from blood loss and shock. The 5th and final bullet came moments later as Sarah was crawling back to Tank's position. It struck her in the thigh, sending new waves of pain through her body and making it almost impossible to move. But even with 5 bullet wounds and growing weakness from blood loss, Sarah wasn't finished. Using every ounce of strength and determination she possessed, Sarah dragged herself back to Tank's side and resumed treating his wounds. Her own blood was mixing with his on the ground, but she continued working to keep him alive. Morrison was still unconscious, but breathing, which meant she now had 2 lives depending on her ability to function despite her injuries. The extraction helicopter arrived just as Sarah was beginning to lose consciousness for blood loss. The pilot, guided by the Apache helicopters overhead, landed as close to their position as possible while door gunners provided suppressive fire against any remaining insurgents. The rescue team found Sarah still conscious and still working on Tank's injuries, despite having been shot 5 times and bleeding heavily. She had managed to keep both SEALs alive through the worst firefight any of them had ever experienced. As the medical team loaded her onto the helicopter, Sarah's last conscious thought was relief that Tank and Morrison were going to survive. She had proven something that night, not just to the military, but to herself. Courage under fire had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with the choice to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. Sarah's first memory after losing consciousness was the rhythmic sound of helicopter rotors and the feeling of warm hands working on her injuries. The flight medics aboard the evacuation helicopter were fighting to keep 3 critically wounded soldiers alive during the longest 20-minute flight of their careers. "We're losing her pressure," one of the medics called out above the noise of the aircraft. "She's lost too much blood. Stay with us, Martinez," another voice urged. "You're going to make it." Sarah tried to speak, to ask about Tank and Morrison, but no words would come. The combination of blood loss, shock, and pain medication had pushed her to the edge of consciousness. All she could do was trust that the same military medical system she served would save her life and the lives of the men she had protected. The landing at the forward surgical hospital was controlled chaos. 3 operating rooms had been prepared for the incoming casualties, and some of the military's best trauma surgeons were standing by. Sarah was conscious enough to see Tank being wheeled into surgery beside her, which gave her hope that he was still alive. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the lead trauma surgeon, took charge of Sarah's case personally. As she examined the 5 gunshot wounds, her expression grew increasingly serious. The bullets had caused extensive tissue damage, and Sarah had lost nearly half her blood volume. Any one of the wounds could have been fatal. Surviving all 5 was almost miraculous. How is she still alive? Dr. Walsh asked her surgical team as they prepared to operate. Stubbornness and adrenaline, replied the anesthesiologist who had seen similar cases before. Some people just refused to die. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Dr. Walsh and Her team worked methodically to repair damaged organs, blood vessels, and bones while fighting to keep Sarah stable. The bullet that had struck her back had missed her spine by millimeters, while the one that hit her side had somehow avoided major organs despite passing through her abdomen. In the next operating room, tank surgery was equally complex. The chest wound had caused massive internal bleeding, and the leg wound had shattered his femur in multiple places. But Sarah's quick treatment in the field had made the difference between life and death. By inserting the chest tube and controlling the bleeding, she had bought him the time he needed to reach definitive medical care. Morrison's injuries were less severe, but still serious. The grenade explosion had caused a concussion and multiple shrapnel wounds, but his thick skull and body armor had protected him from the worst of the blast. He woke up during surgery, his first question about his team's condition. "Tank," Morrison asked groggily as the surgeon worked on a deep cut on his forehead. "He's alive," Dr. Walsh replied from the next operating room. "Your medics saved his life." "And Martinez?" There was a pause before Dr. Walsh answered. "We're working on her now." News of the firefight and Sarah's actions spread quickly through the military community. The story of a female medic who had been shot 5 times while saving Navy SEALs captured attention at every level of command. Within hours, reports were reaching the Pentagon, where senior officers were trying to understand exactly what had happened. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking woman in the Army Medical Corps, received a briefing about the incident while Sarah was still in surgery. The details were remarkable. A female medic had disobeyed orders to stay in a safe position, crossed open ground under heavy fire, continued treating wounded soldiers despite being shot multiple times, and kept 2 Navy SEALs alive until extraction arrived. "Are we sure about these details?" General Hayes asked the briefing officer. "This sounds almost too incredible to be true." "Yes, ma'am. We have statements from Lieutenant Commander Morrison and radio recordings that confirm the sequence of events. The Apache pilots also witnessed part of the action from overhead." The story represented everything that supporters of women in combat roles had argued, that courage, skill, and dedication were not limited by gender. It also challenged critics who had questioned whether women could perform under the extreme stress of combat situations. But the immediate concern was Sarah's recovery. The surgery had been successful, but she faced months of rehabilitation and multiple additional procedures to fully repair the damage from her wounds. The doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis, but warned that she would never be the same physically. Sarah woke up 3 days after the surgery, connected to multiple machines, and surrounded by flowers, cards, and military officials. Her first visitor was Morrison, who was walking with a cane, but had insisted on seeing her as soon as doctors cleared him for movement. "How's Tank?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Alive because of you," Morrison replied, his usual stoic expression replaced by something Sarah had never seen before: genuine emotion. "The doctor said he would have bled out in the field if you hadn't treated him when you did." Morrison sat down beside Sarah's bed, struggling with words that didn't come easily to a man trained for action rather than conversation. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. When you first joined our team, I didn't think you belonged there. I was wrong." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Hayes, who had flown in specifically to meet Sarah. The general's presence attracted attention from hospital staff and other patients, but she seemed focused only on the wounded medic in the hospital bed. "Specialist Martinez, I'm General Hayes. I wanted to meet the soldier who's become the talk of the entire military." Sarah tried to sit up straighter, but winced as pain shot through her injuries. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job." "No, you were doing much more than that," General Hayes replied. "You were proving something that a lot of people didn't want to believe." The general's words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. Sarah's actions had become part of a larger debate about the role of women in combat. But for her, the focus remained on the simple fact that she had kept 2 good men alive when they needed help. Over the following weeks, Sarah's story spread beyond the military. News outlets picked up the account of the female medic who had saved Navy SEALs while wounded herself. The narrative captured public imagination precisely because it challenged preconceptions about gender roles in combat situations. Retired General Robert Hayes, the same officer who had argued against women in combat on television, requested a meeting with Sarah during her recovery. The conversation was private, but witnesses reported that the general spent over an hour with her, asking detailed questions about her training, her decision-making process, and her thoughts about women in combat roles. "I came here to tell you that I was wrong," General Hayes told Sarah as he prepared to leave. "Courage isn't about gender. It's about character. And you've shown more character in one night than most soldiers show in entire careers." The meeting represented a significant shift in perspective from one of the most vocal critics of women in combat roles. Sarah's actions had provided concrete evidence that women could not only perform in combat situations, but could excel under the most extreme circumstances. Tank visited Sarah several times during her recovery, each time expressing gratitude that seemed to overwhelm him. The tough SEAL, known for his stoic demeanor and professional focus, struggled to find words adequate to express what Sarah had done for him. "I've been in combat for 12 years, Tank told her during one visit. "I've seen a lot of brave people do incredible things. But what you did out there, keeping us alive while you were bleeding from 5 bullet wounds, that's something I've never seen before." Sarah's recovery was slow and painful, requiring multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. The bullet wounds had caused permanent damage that would affect her for the rest of her life, ending her military career, but not diminishing her contribution to the service. The military's response to Sarah's actions was immediate and comprehensive. She was awarded the Silver Star, the nation's third highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation read, in part, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy." Specialist Martinez displayed extraordinary heroism while serving as a medic during combat operations, repeatedly exposing herself to enemy fire to provide life-saving medical treatment to wounded soldiers. The award ceremony took place 6 months later at the Pentagon, with Sarah walking slowly but steadily to receive the medal from the Secretary of Defense. The ceremony was attended by military leadership, members of Congress, and Sarah's family, who had flown in from Texas to witness their daughter being recognized for her extraordinary courage. Morrison and Tank were both present at the ceremony, fully recovered from their injuries, and returned to active duty. Their presence added weight to the recognition, as battle-tested warriors acknowledging the debt they owed to the woman who had saved their lives. Sarah Martinez represents the very best of our military values, the Secretary of Defense said during the ceremony. She demonstrated that courage under fire is not determined by gender, but by character, training, and commitment to fellow service members. The broader impact of Sarah's story extended far beyond individual recognition. Military policies regarding women in combat roles were reviewed and expanded, with Sarah's actions serving as a case study in the capabilities of female soldiers. Training programs were modified to better prepare all soldiers for the realities of modern combat, regardless of gender. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the perceptions of those who had doubted women's ability to perform in combat situations. Sarah's story became part of military lore, told in training courses and referenced in discussions about courage and leadership. The doubt that had once surrounded women in combat was replaced by a new understanding of what was possible when soldiers were judged by their actions rather than their gender. Years later, Sarah would work as a civilian emergency medical technician, applying the skills she had learned in the military to save lives in her hometown. She rarely spoke publicly about that night in the desert, but her story continued to inspire a new generation of military medical personnel who understood that heroism could come from the most unexpected sources. The legacy of that firefight was written not just in official military records, but in the lives of the people Sarah had saved and the barriers she had broken. Tank and Morrison both went on to complete successful military careers, never forgetting the night when a female medic had proved that courage under fire belonged to anyone brave enough to act when others needed help. Sarah's story became proof that doubt could be overcome not through argument or politics, but through actions that spoke louder than any debate. In the space of one terrible and heroic night, she had changed how the military viewed women in combat and demonstrated that heroes are made not by their gender, but by their willingness to risk everything for others. The 5 bullet wounds healed, leaving scars that Sarah would carry for the rest of her life. But the more important legacy was the proof she had provided that courage, skill, and dedication could overcome any doubt about who belongs on the battlefield when lives are at stake.